right, so the next film we're going to review is the documentary Some Kind of Heaven, directed by Lance Oppenheim. And I have to say, it's almost a sequel. I'd like to call it the sequel to my senior thesis film, and perhaps also a documentary about my weekends going to visiting my grandparents my whole life. But really, the film is about The Villages, which is America's largest retirement town. I think over 130,000 baby boomers live there in the middle of literally nowhere, Florida. It's central Florida. And there's about like 50 golf courses. It's sometimes called the Disneyland for retirees. But the film really just catalogs the life in the villages. And, I was speaking of absurdist, sort of the absurdist life. But it does reflect on quite a few of these kind of outliers. Some people who might not see this retirement community as absolutely perfect. So there's a couple, Anne and Reggie, who've been married for 47 years. Reggie's kind of going through, I don't know what kind of crisis, but he's going through a crisis in his life, and he has some drug possession and has to go to talk that over with the local courts. And then there's Dennis, which kind of is reminiscent of Nomadland a bit, but he's living in a van looking for another woman to take him on. And then there's Anne, who's kind of found herself in this situation. She's still working, she's not retired, and she doesn't necessarily see this place as the dreamland, the Disneyland that some of the others do. And so it's a bit about how they're dealing with the kind of, your later years in life, and perhaps just the way that this community is built. In fact, this community is sort of built on, it's very standard for Floridian sort of subdivisions, and it's built on this kind of new urbanism plan, which is kind of to bring back the old town center and try to encourage community. What it doesn't go into, this film, is there's quite a lot of controversy. It was actually one of the top places, I think, Trump, it was like almost 100% Trump, not 100%, but, quite a big place where there were a lot of Trump fans. And there's just been, there was quite a few STDs going around the town too. Like, it was very controversial in that sense. But yeah, it's known in the Florida realm as, an interesting place. And I'm curious what you guys thought of this film, because I literally have been to many of those places. The bowling alley my grandmother went to. My grandparents lived right 5 miles north of this place. They lived in the less fancy villages up north of that. So I know it so well, and it's actually very spot on in a lot of ways. But yeah, curious about what you guys thought about the film.
Pretty fascinating. I enjoyed the film. I'm sure we'll talk about its qualities as a documentary in a bit. But in terms of like the subject matter it shows, it's kind of fascinating, and it's funny. It's actually funny you bringing up the thing about STDs there, because one of the images which is there very early on in the film, which to me was just the most bizarre thing, is just all these sort of like, very, very senior, very grey-haired folks grinding away to blurred lines. Early on, it was just a very bizarre image to me. So it's definitely an interesting subject matter. I think I also appreciated a little bit the moments where they speak to, is it the son of one of the founders, or is it one of the founders? Yeah. I can't remember.
Yeah.
About kind of what the motivation was for creating this place, and some of the stuff around wanting to create almost this kind of like time capsule of location of what the people of the age of the residents remember of, like, main streets and town centres of their youth, and trying to capture that. It gives a bit of colour to what people mean by the Disneyland for retirees. And I think some of the different perspectives it gives, from both people who love it, people who are not so keen, people who are having to deal with issues as a couple and individually, and different things like that. I think it adds a bit of colour to it. I think there's maybe certain bits I would have liked to have seen it perhaps interrogate more, but I think that speaks to more my fascination with subject matter. I don't think it's necessarily something the film was looking to do, so I don't think there's any point in criticising it for that. I think the stuff it does do in presenting those perspectives and presenting it with a particular tone and way, I think it did it very well, and I found it a fascinating documentary, to be honest.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think on a technical level, it's uses color, uses composition in a real kind of Wes Anderson way that kind of befits the idealized view of community that these managed communities are trying to get across. And the way it represents that kind of living in a theme park, living in a fantasy world, you mentioned Trump, Amanda, living in a conservative fantasy of what America supposedly once was. It just looks like they're living in the town from the Truman Show. And I found it fascinating to get these perspectives from the people. And how it shows that even in this paradise, there's spectres of mental illness, dementia, loneliness, poverty, suicidal ideation. They're just hidden beneath this surface veneer. I think I would have liked to hear more about the community as a whole, how the community works, and sort of how these villages were set up in the first place, how they're managed. But again, like Jim said, I think that speaks to my fascination more than any failing of the documentary. I thought it was really effective with its strong focus on the three central viewpoints of the four documentary subjects.
Yeah, I thought this was a really interesting documentary. I don't know a lot about the villages in Florida. I've heard a little bits and bobs, but I've never really explored the topic. And I think that if you're going into it without knowing anything about it, you do learn quite a lot from what this documentary kind of provides you with. And it's really interesting how very American dream-like it is. And I think, like Simon said, it's almost like a Wes Anderson film. It almost seems like it's, even in the documentary, it's kind of playing tribute to what it is. It's constantly just marketing itself as this kind of utopia. But then as you dive into it, when you meet all the kind of the four characters that it fixates on and it tells their story, you realise that it's very much one of those places where people do kind of move into and think that when you go in there, your baggage is sort of left at the door waiting for you if you ever leave, but you bring it inside the whole way. And you kind of see that a lot through Reggie, who's having some sort of crisis, and a lot of substance abuse issues and things like that. And you see that, for him, there's only a certain amount of solace that a place like that can really provide. But on the flip side, you have someone like Barbara, who's there to find love again, and start her life again somewhere kind of afresh. And then you see how determined she is to try and get the most out of this place that she possibly can. So it's nice the way that you do have people kind of thriving in this place, but at the same time, you have people not really adjusting to it. And I think it just shows that for certain people, this is a kind of utopia, but for others, it's never going to meet the unrealistic expectations that they think it's not going to solve the problems in their life that I suppose it's advertised to do so. But yeah, I got really engrossed into all the characters in it. I was so fascinated. I would watch a mini series about these people, to be honest. I felt like it was almost like a kind of Wes Anderson kind of film, but with in some ways, all the characters from old Harmony Korine films just thrown in, like the man living in his van, kind of trying to seduce all these people to get a house, and I was just like, you know what? You can't even be mad. You're just sort of like, this is the most honest reflection of this place and how these people are living, and it was just so fascinating. I liked how the director didn't just show you kind of the outside of it. He was following you as Reggie was in court discussing his DUI or something that he's done while being stoned or drunk, and I really liked how you got every single side of this community. It wasn't just focusing on the palm trees and the beaches, but at the same time, you kind of felt like you were with them, especially I was laughing when Jim was saying about them all grinding, and I felt like you almost felt like an awkward person sitting in this bar watching it, and there was a second-hand kind of uncomfortableness, but it was just, yeah, it was quite a delight. I would definitely recommend it, especially to people that don't know anything about retirement communities, especially the villages. It's something that I don't think you couldn't describe to anyone without, you'd have to see it for yourself, for sure, I think.
I mean, it's definitely, I love that I love this film so much, but I'm slightly disappointed that Lance got to it first, because it was on my short list of topics of films that need to happen, and it's good to hear that everyone quite enjoys the topic. I think it's, the one thing I have to say is that having known the place, and I appreciate the absurdism that comes out in the way that it's shot, and the beauty in the way it's shot. I wouldn't necessarily call it Wes Anderson as much as almost Tim Burton and Edward Scissorhands, and I think that certainly, like, the attempt, and Truman Show, for example. Truman Show for sure was filmed in a new urbanism design, and this is a new urbanism design that was created and manufactured for older people to enjoy the utopian. And like I had briefly mentioned, I did about a film about one that Disney had created for, sort of all ages and whatnot. But I do find it kind of definitely quite depressing. I agree with everybody that it would have been nice to have focused a little bit more on the community aspect and kind of the overall sort of, the overall generation of this place, and learn a little bit more about that. But it really was a character driven, and I think it represents that not everybody fits within that utopian perspective, and you're sold something. And honestly, you mentioned beaches. There's no beaches around. It's one. I mean, like, I grew up nearby, and nearby, or went to visit all the time. It's somewhat in the middle of nowhere. And I'm still shocked, just on a conceptual notion, that there's so many people who have just moved to absolutely the middle of nowhere and created, decided to plant themselves in a prefabricated area. And I find it quite depressing. And I think their responses to it, like, there's, I think, a quote where she says, "This is not reality." I mean, imagine growing up there.
It's kind of fascinating. It's actually it's kind of sad that you don't a comparison to it. Like, just think of the shots of the place, and undoubtedly, like, the filmmaking has heightened this impression, but it's very serendipitous you mentioning Vivarium in the last review, actually, right? Because in the way that, like, some of these streets are shot and all the rest of it, and kind of like the sameness of some of the streets, it actually, that's kind of what it reminded me of. I mean, obviously it's not got the same sort of, like, sickly pallid green to the whole place, but just that
but
kind of, like,
it does, though. If you
yeah,
go
well,
there,
yeah,
it does.
it actually reminded me a little bit of that. I think. I also think it's a very well constructed documentary in terms of, like, covering a bunch of different aspects, but not hammering home too much. Because, like, and it does a good job of contrasting things as well. Like, you can certainly get, and I think the trailer actually opens with this, is like, there's a group of women called Elaine. There's about 12 of them. So it does like,
amazing.
"Hi, I'm Elaine. Hi, I'm Elaine." And it kind of hammers on this kind of like this almost kind of like, groupthink, hive mind aspect of it, where you think everybody's kind of there because they all want the same thing and everybody's on the same page. But then you get the contrast where people don't. And in particular, I think the final shot of the film is kind of heartbreaking, actually. And it does very skillfully, I think, get to different perspectives of this place. It would be very easy to just lean into the absurdity of it, and don't be wrong, I mean, it definitely highlights that, like, quite what an absurd place it can seem. It doesn't shy away from that, but I think it gets across very well those differing perspectives, and I think it does it in a way that goes beyond just the presentation of different perspectives from different people. I think the way that certain events and incidents are highlighted, and the way that they're shot, or the way that they use footage from different sources, such as the courtroom hearing and things, I think it works very well in getting across an impression of the place. How accurate that impression is, I don't know. You're going to know far better than me, Amanda. But I think it does that extremely well with the material that's there.
It's an accurate impression of Florida, and I think that's the one thing that, like, you know, what even people responded to when I did the celebration thing. People were like, how nuts it is to live in that way or whatnot. And it's like, actually, this is across the board, you know, the way people sort of live and sold. And I think that's just this mixture of what you want versus what you know, who you are as an individual, and how I actually really responded very strongly to that. And I think I messed up saying Barbara. I didn't mention Barbara's name, but both Barbara and Anne. And I think it also shows not just, I mean, because they're human beings and it's a documentary, but I do think that shows that the skill of this filmmaker to kind of really hone in on their, you know, you could really feel their you know, their emotions, you know, whether it was loneliness or you know, the feeling of being patient with with her partner for 47 years who's going through this transformation. And it was really, really strong character studies in that way. And I thought that was an exceptional, as much as I wanted to see other characters and the funny things that go on and you know, the amusingness of that, I think that was, no matter where that was really powerfully done. It was just done in a setting which is, I mean, this camel, you know, that the preacher had or whatever. I certainly remember seeing a little dog yelling at a buffalo because they put a buffalo in, you know, in the cage to say, you know, here, you're where buffalo roam, you know. And when I first saw that in the villages, I was like, where is this? Like, this is surreal. Why do people live like this? Gators going by, you know. So it is that way, but it's you know, it's not real, and she's right, but these emotions and the lives that these people are leading are everybody's had and dealt with, and they've just been planted into this, you know, this new surreal space that is, you know, that they were sold on. And I think that works really well as a documentary, so I really liked that.
That sense of unreality sort of came through in, I don't know if it's a part of the documentary or part of the community itself, but the almost complete absence of black people or Latin American people. It's massively white, and it's got heaven in the title, and Christianity, white Christianity, is a very heavy influence on the film. There's churches, there's a replica of the cross at Calvary. It's a white Christian paradise, but there's no mosques, there's no synagogues, at least not shown in the documentary.
It's funny you say that, because there was one line that really stood out to me, and it's when it's focusing on a pastor, and I think it was saying like, if you worry, like trying to basically tell people not to worry, say if you worry, then you don't trust in God. And and I'd say that